Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. The following story that you are going to be listening to, it is a narration of a message that I received. So I posted part 1 and part 2, and this is part 3 of that message. The part 3 of that message reads like this. So my brother, I did everything that the pastor had told me to do. This pastor, he had told me that I was no longer allowed to keep my mom's ashes, the ashes that had been given to me by my mother's relatives after I had forced my mother's relatives to accept what I wanted to be done with my mother's deceased body, even though they had tried to refuse and to fight with me. But since I had the money and the spiritual connection, I had actually convinced all of my mother's relatives so that we can have my mother to be cremated. So the pastor then said that this was the second stage. All that I had to do was to take that container, the one that he had handed to me, and I had to remove my mother's ashes. And removing my mother's ashes, it was supposed to be done in a grave. This process, he said, you are also going to do it alone, but later on I am going to join you in some of your prayers. The weird thing about this ritual was that I had to do it at night. As long as it was in the evening, any time was going to be okay, but I had to do it when I will be standing at this other grave, and the person that would have been buried at that grave must be someone that was not related to me in any kind of way. So you know that area that is called Mbuzi, that grave site. I had gone there in the afternoon. This was after I had been given a recommendation to go to this other man who have a car dealership. When I went there, the man, he had already been given a call by the pastor, and the man then made me to sign some papers, and I was then given a pay later car. So I then took that car and I drove it, and I went with it to that cemetery at Mbuzi. I drove around, and then I came across these other guys. You know, there are a lot of those guys that are hanging around the Mbuzi cemetery, those ones that when you speak with them, actually they can keep your relative's grave, like they'll be making sure that there is no grass that grows around your relative's grave, and making sure that it is always kept nice. I then spoke with those men, and I told them that I wanted their help. So one of them, I invited him to jump into my car. We then drove just for about a minute whilst I was driving around, pretending as if I was looking for one of my relatives' grave. We looked around, my brother, until finally I felt that there was something that was moving in my stomach, and I knew that this was the sign. So we were standing near this other grave, and when I read the sign that was on that grave, that was when I said, that one, that is the one. And I pretended as if I was really sad, because the signpost that was on that grave, it was like rusting, and it seemed as if the relatives of this deceased woman, when they had buried her, they had never even bothered to return back to check out on her grave. I then lied to these men that I was with. I said that this is what children will do to you. I lied to him that this auntie of mine, she was the one who had made it possible for me to have all of this wealth that I have, because she had actually taken me to school since primary. Soon after my father had passed away, I saw this man folding his arms, and I saw him holding his face as he was in disbelief when I was mocking my auntie's children. He was saddened by this thing. He then said, "Boss, do not worry. For a fee, I will be able to clean up her grave, and her spirit is going to be happy." I then told him that I wanted this grave to be cleaned that same day. He said, "Just give us 2 hours, then we would be done." I then offered them $220. I said that this is the money that I was going to offer them if they were quickly going to clean up that place. I then got into my car. I dropped him at the place where I had picked him up. I saw him running around with his friend trying to get some tools, and I told them that I wanted to rush back to my business, but later on I was going to come and check up on them. So my brother, later on I then came, because I wanted to have an idea where this grave was. So I was actually marking the whole cemetery, marking where this grave was. I then saw that there was this other big tree, we call it Moachap tree, but it is just a little bit cut. I then saw that this grave, it was close to that tree. Then I drove off after I had given these guys their money. I then returned back home, waiting for the time to arrive when it would be evening, just like that pastor had told me that this ritual that I was supposed to perform alone, I had to perform it at night. I then went to Mbuzi and I just found a place to park my car, waiting for the evening to arrive. When I saw that less people were walking around the grave site, I then drove into the cemetery and I started looking for that grave, but to my surprise, I could not even find this grave. It was when, after I had made a WhatsApp voice note to that pastor, that was when he directed me exactly where this grave was at. I then went to that place where he said that this grave is located in such and such a position, and I then found the grave. So in my car, I had that small beautiful coffin where my mother's ashes were, and as well as that metallic can that was given to me, as well as that metallic container that had been given to me by that prophet. I took that small coffin first and I placed it on top of that grave, just like that prophet had told me to do. I then returned back to the car where I stripped myself naked. I stripped myself naked. I stripped myself naked. I was only wearing my stockings because there were a lot of thorns. I then returned back to that grave of a stranger that I had placed my mother's grave on top. Then I started speaking with my mother. I told my mother that this place was a final resting place, but still I wanted to use a spirit. I wanted her to help me out in this life, just like she had helped me when she was still alive. I said that, my mother, you kept me safe when I was still in your womb, when I was growing in your womb, when I was helpless. You have that opportunity to kill me if you wanted to. You could have done an abortion and I could have died, but you kept me alive the same way that you kept me alive when you were still on earth. Please send your spirit so that it can still protect me. Give me money. Then I felt that there was wind that started blowing. This wind, it transformed and it became more like a whirlwind, but I could not properly see it since it was dark. Then I just felt that this was a whirlwind that came and surrounded me. I was scared, to be honest, but I was already deep into this thing and it was time for me to make money. I then walked slowly to that grave where I had placed my mother's small coffin, the one that had her ashes, and I took my manhood, just like what that pastor had told me. So what I was doing was that with that small coffin, as it was opened, then I started digging up her ashes as I was placing those. Then what I started doing was that I started pushing my mother's ashes using my manhood so that they can fall straight into that container that I was holding. I did this, I struggled until finally I finished off all of those ashes using my manhood as I was pushing those ashes. When I was done, I then returned back to my place. Then I found a spirit that was waiting for me. This spirit was the one that later killed off that lady that was so much in love with me. This woman, I didn't love her, but she kept on coming back into my life. Then that spirit said that, I want her to be your wife. This was my mother. She said that, I cannot be your wife, for I am your mother, but I have chosen this one. I want her to be my daughter-in-law, because in the spirit world she was saying that she feels so lonely. She wanted a companion, and she wanted this companion to assist her so that I can become wealthy. So she said that, I know this girl very much. I know that deep down in her heart she loves you. I then said to my mom's spirit, you do whatever you want. So when I walked into that ward where she was admitted into, she looked at me and I heard her soul. Her soul was crying out for mercy. She kept on saying, I am young, I cannot die. I cannot die. I then responded to her physically, and I said, this is the price that you have to pay for loving me. I need to have a wife, and I have chosen you. Later on on that same evening, she then passed away. Her relatives buried her, but what they don't know is that I then returned back to her grave. I went to Mbudzi still at night, and I went to her grave and I spoke with her. First thing that I did is I apologized, and I laid some money on her grave. It was coins that I laid on her grave, and I said, this is the bride price that I have paid for you. Now please follow me. Let's go back home. You are my wife now. You loved me when you were still alive. You can still love me again now that you are no more. I want you to work for me just like a wife works for her own husband, clean for her husband. That is what I want you to do for me. And her spirit followed me. Oh, dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by one of our brothers. He was saying that he has this bracelet. So this bracelet, it is a small compartment, and he said that inside that small compartment, he has a few of his late mother's ashes. Everywhere he is, he goes around with his mother's ashes. Yeah,